so I assume everybody's here that's going to be here, although I hear 2 police officers and one of our staff members is stuck in the elevator in the garage. So, second time this week, although the police officers weren't with her the first time, so they're working on that. But we'd like to get started, and I'd like to welcome you all to the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission. For those of you who are not familiar with who we are, it's your first time visiting. We're the regional planning agency for the city of Worcester and 39 surrounding towns. We're one of 13 regional planning agencies in the state. And at this point, I would like to recognize Tim Brennan. He's the Executive Director of Pioneer Valley Planning Commission in Springfield. And Glenn Eaton, the Executive Director of the Montechusett Regional Planning Commission in Fitchburg. And I know Mark Rassicott is here from MAPC in Boston. Are there any other members of any other RPAs that are here that I missed? But we're throughout the state, and we're here for you. We serve your communities. Our mission at CMRPC, which is very similar to a lot of the other RPAs, is to improve the quality of life for those who live and work in the region. And based on the ballot initiative of question 4, the majority of those who vote in our region favored the legalization of marijuana. And throughout most of the RPAs, this has happened as well. There's a significant area of the state that opposed it, and Jeff will show that as part of one of his slides. This is being held, this meeting today, as part of our Regional Dialogue Series. And the Regional Dialogue Series is being paid through funding through the District Local Technical Assistance Funds. We reach out to many of the different departments. We go beyond the planning boards, even though we're a regional planning agency. And as evidenced here tonight, today, we have boards of selectmen, we have planners, we have public safety, public health, town administrators. We're here to serve any department in any municipality, and we're a conduit between your local government, the state, and the federal agencies as well. So thanks for being here. I would just like to go over a few quick items. For those of you who are not familiar, the restrooms are in the back of the hall. And in the event that we have an emergency or the fire alarms go off, I don't think there's supposed to be any testing today, but you never know. The exits, and we have a full house. We've never had this many people, and I think somebody offered free samples maybe, I'm not sure. I don't know why so many people are here, but I do know that you can gift up to 1 ounce. So those of you who are looking for last minute shopping ideas, I'm not looking for that, but anyway, our exits are to the back where you came in, and also to my left on the screen, you can exit through the back and you're on the train station on the platform. But thank you all for being here today. We have executive committee members from CMRPC as well. Hope you find this informative listening session and come up with great ideas at the end. Our 2 keynote speakers will be Chris Ryan, our community development and planning manager, and Jeff Bagg, principal planner in the CDAP department as well. So at this point, Chris, I want to turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
And please make sure that you validate your parking tickets. Before I forget and everybody's stuck out in the parking lot, you need to put your ticket after it's validated. We validate it in the back. Put it into the machine as though you're paying for the ticket. It gives it back to you and you use that same ticket at the gate. And you only have 15 minutes from the time you validate your ticket until you go through the gate. So please plan accordingly, otherwise you're going to have everyone lined up behind you and they will know that you talked too long. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I know there are edibles in the back, but I think they're benign, so no worries there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the Act in an overview, introducing you to the elements of it, and then we're going to be going through a review of local control with Jeff, and then we're going to have a moderated question and answer session, and then we'll give you some conclusions and next steps and a survey that Jeff has prepared. So just an introduction. Yeah.
You've got to get closer to the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, for the recording. So I'll turn like that. So on November 8th of this year, voters in the state approved the initiative petition question 4, creating the Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act. The following aspects of the Act will be reviewed as an introduction. provide a summary of results in Central Mass and across the state, talk about personal consumption, and then 2 levels of state control, the Cannabis Advisory Board and the Cannabis Control Commission. So this just shows the communities in our region. 31 of 40 of our communities did pass it. You can see those highlighted in red were the communities that did not pass it. And overall in the state, 53.6% were in favor of the question. I'm going to first talk to you about personal consumption. In the primary residence, it allows home growth of up to 12 plants, and that's for more than one person. I believe it's 6 plants per person. And then 10 ounces possession in the home, and then 1 ounce transfer without sale. In public, there's no consumption in a public place or where smoking tobacco is prohibited unless on-site consumption is authorized. And in a vehicle, you can have up to 1 ounce of possession, no open container, must be in a locked glove compartment or trunk and not readily accessible to the driver or the passengers. Violations, generally civil penalties of up to $100 fine. At a rental property or business, the property owner does have the opportunity to prohibit and or regulate consumption, display, production, manufacture, or sale. The language suggests that property owner can prohibit possession or consumption of edibles, or cannot. This should be viewed in terms of residential property owner and commercial property owners. And then state and local facilities allows the Commonwealth and subdivisions, local governments from prohibiting possession and consumption on the property or facilities. I think I'm going to do this. In terms of state control, there are 2 different levels like I talked about, the Cannabis Advisory Board and the Cannabis Control Commission. The Advisory Board must be appointed by the governor by February 1st, 2017, and the composition of 15 members is in these various specializations. The roles and responsibilities of the CAB are to study and to make recommendations on the regulations, to advise, make recommendations to the Commission on guidelines, rules and regulations, and any changes it considers important or necessary, and advise on the preparation of regulations under Chapter 64N of Mass General Laws and 94G. Now, the Control Commission is a more ongoing organization that is really slated to have a number of different responsibilities, which I'm going to go over. It must be appointed by the Treasurer by March 1st of 2017. 3 composition, 1 commissioner and 2 associate commissioners, and they're appointed based on expertise or experience in public health, law enforcement, social justice, or the business side of the equation. And in general, 2 members constitute a quorum. The CCC may expend money for investigations, clerical work, and other purposes under the Act. All records are considered public records. The roles and responsibilities, they must have regulations in place and adopted by September 15th, 2017. They shall have a general supervision and sole regulatory authority over the conduct of business of marijuana establishments. They shall hold public hearings before the adoption, amendment, or repeal of any regulation. And they're also responsible for state licensing. So the Cannabis Control Commission, when they receive something from the operator, they forward it to the local municipality, and then they either have 90 days to issue the appropriate license or send a notice of rejection, citing specific reasons. And except where a municipality has prohibited the use, the following criteria are established. The applicant must comply with all regulations. The CCC is not notified by a town that the use is not in accordance with regulations in place, and the property at the time of adoption is not within 500 feet of a pre-existing public or private school that's noted in the bylaw. The marijuana tax is set at 3.75% of total sales price, which is a lot lower than many other states have set their sales tax. It shall be paid by the retailer to the commissioner. And the commissioners will deposit those funds into the Marijuana Regulation Fund, and those funds shall be subject to appropriation. The fund shall consist of all money from license applications, violations, and revenue generated by the excise tax and the interest earned. The fund shall be used first for the implementation, administration, and enforcement of the chapter by the commission and by the cities and towns that authorize the operation of these establishments within their jurisdiction. And the marijuana tax, there is a local option. The local option may be imposed, and the local rate shall be no greater than 2% of the local sales tax. So who's looking at this? Certainly the state legislature is looking at regulatory issues and rules. It appears that the legislature will not delay the act from taking effect. There have been many signals that the legislature may continue to review the timeline and possibly other aspects of the act beyond the personal consumption provisions. In early December, we hosted a legislative breakfast and had a panel discussion moderated by Senator Michael Moore, and he noted several things that should be noted. The importance of legislators hearing directly from member communities as well as from groups or collectives such as the regional planning agencies. Not all members of the legislature want to delay the implementation. It is the notion of supporting the will of the voters. However, others want the language of the act to be carefully reviewed. The issues stretch beyond the tax rates and relate to issues such as enforcement, state licensing, timelines, and its potential impacts at the local level. And the act was not created by legislators. It was written with the money and expertise of the pro-marijuana lobbyists, and therefore careful review is necessary, according to the Senator. The Mass Municipal Lawyers Association is also taking a look at it. This group of attorneys from across the state has been reviewing the language of the act. In a letter to the governor, state Senate President, and Speaker of the House, they provided focus on the potential problems, confusion, and reduction in local authority created by the need for a municipality to restrict local retail marijuana sales only by referendum. And the letter cites the following issues. A bylaw in a town is adopted pursuant to the charter, which in most cases requires enactment by the legislative body, town meeting. There is no authorization in a town for the adoption of a bylaw by voters. As an alternative, reading requiring local referendum on a particular bylaw, the language could be read to require voters to authorize the local legislative body to adopt such a bylaw or to have a bylaw enacted by the local legislative body to receive the affirmative vote of the voters before it goes into effect. And since towns will be preparing warrants for town meeting in short order, our members are in need of some clarity so as to properly advise their municipal clients. The Mass Municipal Association is also looking into this. These municipal officials have provided a letter to the governor, state Senate President, and Speaker of the House, and have raised also numerous concerns. Municipal officials are scrambling to get information and plan their own policy responses. This will be very difficult to do in the short term, as there are many unanswered questions and many significant flaws in the new law. The MMA letter cites the following major concerns. Number one, deadlines that are too short to give state and local officials enough time to prepare for and administer the law. Number two, the preemption and loss of local control. Three, the unregulated homegrown provision. Number four, inadequate revenues, the 3.75% tax. And last, the need for a more independent cannabis advisory board. Certainly, municipal attorneys are already looking at various aspects of the act. There is a Kopelman and Page memo that identifies the act containing inconsistencies and outright contradictions. Questions and concerns that have been raised regarding the timeline for implementation, enforcement, local control, regulation of personal growers, and the amount of the tax. The act provides that no agreement between a municipality and marijuana establishment may contain a payment that is not directly proportional and reasonably related to the costs imposed on the municipality. And municipalities may wish to start planning in anticipation of annual town meetings and spring and fall elections. There is a state Senate special committee that's been created. Published in March 2016, the report from this committee compares many aspects of Question 4 language to Colorado and Washington. It compares a wide range of policy components, such as possession, use, and consumption, growing, distributing, sales, and marketing, taxes and revenues, state and local control, banking issues, federal law, and compliance issues. The State Treasurer's Office. There was a December 5, 2016 Mass Live article discussing some of the Treasurer's practical and fiscal concerns. The state will have to set up a new Cannabis Control Commission, which we talked about, to oversee the industry, craft rules, and set up licensing processes. The Treasurer's Office just put out a request for proposals from companies to find out how much it would cost the state to buy an electronic tracking and licensing software system to process the applications. And you actually have to build an agency, put it in an office, hire commissioners by March 1st, have an executive director, legal staff, investigators, and a licensing operation. And certainly the software and other aspects of administration will cost money. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to listen to a little bit of Deb Goldberg's speech that was carried in NPR.
So this is an attempt. We're going to try to use some multimedia here. We're going to turn this on. You should be able to hear it audibly from your seat. And then from here, we'll transition into the next section, local control. This is about a 4-minute clip, an interview with the treasurer. It's back from November 10th, but in some ways that was the sort of the initial reaction. So we'll give this a try.
On Tuesday, Massachusetts voters approved a ballot question to legalize the use of recreational marijuana. The measure charges the state treasurer's office with creating the Cannabis Control Commission to oversee the new industry. For more, I spoke to State Treasurer Deb Goldberg, who opposed the ballot question, but has a lot of work ahead to implement it. The measure makes some changes to law starting December 15th, so I asked Treasurer Goldberg what will change on that date.
Starting on December 15th, people will be allowed to have homegrown marijuana. I believe it's an ounce that they can also carry on themselves, but that will not be at the point where there are any kind of retail operations and the like whatsoever. It's just for personal use.
Well, the legislature and governor can, of course, change the law. One frequent criticism is that the measure sets a tax rate that's significantly lower than other states that have already legalized marijuana. Is changing that rate a priority for you?
I actually have been quoted saying the higher the better. This is one of the things that I think the public really did not comprehend. When I would talk to friends who were going to vote yes, because we'll get tons of revenue, I would very, very explicitly explain that the ballot question calls for a 3.75% excise tax. Yes, we do add in the sales tax of 6.25%, and then there's a 2% local option. Let's just use Washington State. It isn't 37% total in Washington State. It is 37% excise tax plus 6.5% sales tax. When you look at those dichotomies, and you know, I want to emphasize that I am a business person, in fact, a former retailer, so I understand operating in this environment. Washington State does not allow homegrown, and they have a much, much higher tax rate. In that context, they're making revenue, but we don't have either of those, and so I think that given the costs of what it will take to start and run the Control Commission, that the revenues to the state that will benefit people's lives will be de minimis.
Well, I want to talk about that Control Commission, which your department will be in charge of. You've said that one of the big challenges is that you're charged with starting up this commission to regulate the marijuana industry, but with no startup money to do it.
That's correct.
So will you ask the legislature for extra funding to start the Cannabis Control Commission? And
well,
how much would you say?
I think there's no choice but to do that. I don't think the public understood that in order for the legislature to give us money to start up and get it going, and you have to remember this will not just impact revenues to the Cannabis Control Commission, but you've got at least 5 or 6 different executive branches that will need additional funding for those individuals to be doing the job that they need to do with respect to this. And there will be additional costs at the local level for public safety and local zoning. So there are a lot of costs that aren't even directly involved in the Cannabis Control Commission, that will need to take away from something else. And these were all grave concerns of mine. I felt that if we're going to do this, we should do it right, and that we should work collaboratively and put all the pieces in place and have the funding in place for all the different areas that need to work on this in order to do it correctly. Because let's remember, at the end of the day, we are going to get it right, and we're going to create a new environment, and it is one also that involves public safety.
Well, it sounds like there's quite a bit here that you would like to see changed in the law that was passed. How soon do you plan to go to the legislature to work out what might be changed on the legislative
level?
level?
The legislature has already begun work on the thought process behind it. Both the leadership in the Senate and in the House, along with the governor and myself, we've had many different conversations. And so I think that you'll now see the collaboration and pace increase. I think there is a lot of general feeling that we're all on the same page. Revenues are short, timelines are too short, and we all recognize the need to collaborate.
Thanks so much, Treasurer Goldberg.
Thank you.
Great. So when I heard that, I thought that that was so appropriate for all of us to hear and listen to. It was back in November, but a lot of it has not really been resolved yet. So before we switch gears, I apologize for the screen. It's the lighting in the back, so I'm gonna have to work through that. I have a lot of slides. Hopefully, they won't be too negatively affected by that. I did want to remind everyone that we are recording this video taping. That's a GoPro that we have here on the podium, and we're gonna do our best to post this on our website so that anyone can view it. I really want to send a special thanks to Janet Pierce, the executive director, because she's very forward-thinking and was really supportive of us just trying to take this project on. There's so many questions. So today, for us up here, it's not really stump the chump kind of thing, because you could probably do that really easily. Through my slides, we definitely raised a lot of questions, and a really important part of our session today is question listening component with all of you. It's such a great opportunity to see all of you here, all of your expertise, planners, town administrators, public officials, public safety people. So the best opportunity is for everyone to hear everyone else's questions, because I think one of my concerns as a former town planner is once you're in your town and your head's down and you're focused on what's happening in your town, you might forget that everyone is dealing with this, and so that's a thread we'll weave through this whole thing. The information that Mr. Ryan went through, all those memos, the interview with Deb Goldberg, the Senate committee report are all on our website right now, so that information is available, so you can use that. One of the things I think is really interesting, this is all before I go to my slides, so it's a problem, but the media. So the media loves this, I think, and it's good and it's bad. So it's good because people are talking about it. I was listening to the radio on my way in, and it was the joke of the day on the morning shows. But it's really important because I think the media can help, but the media has a lot of misinformation. And it's not their fault, because when we go through my section here, there are just a lot of questions. So I think listening to the media, taking it with a grain of salt, but we need to be paying attention. I think that will help. The anecdote was I have two young daughters, and so my father came over this morning to help me get out of the house early. And he's like, well, I don't know what the big deal is. I didn't think this was happening until like 2018, January. I'm like, well, yeah, okay. But everyone has to deal with this, and there's nothing in place, and towns aren't going to deal with it in January 2018. They're starting today. So there's that little bit of not sure what people understand out there. Obviously, all of us are tuned in, but the general public may or may not really have a grasp on what they approve and how much work and time is going to be involved in kind of setting this up. So with that said, not all my slides look like this. So I'm going to do my best to. The one thing I want to say with the media, just yesterday, the governor's top public safety official released an 8-page memo. I'm sure some of the public safety officials here may have this. Literally came out yesterday, and I think there's going to be a lot of this pace, this sort of thing, the day before or the week before deadlines. So we don't really dig too deep into law enforcement concerns at this point, at this session, but we want you to raise your questions here, because I think one of the key things that we want to get out of this is give you a voice through the regional planning agencies to your legislators. I think Mr. Ryan mentioned Senator Moore, and he's a legislator here in Worcester County, and what he said is he wants emails from towns, so that when they start their formal session, he can hold it up and say, look, I've got 55 emails from 55 different towns, and they're concerned with X, Y, and Z. And so that's a really important thing. I know that all the town people are meeting with their board of selectmen, their planning boards are digging into your own town's concerns, but this is a key moment where the legislature needs to understand some of the concerns, because they have first crack at this and probably a limited amount of time to make potential changes. So I do cover that a little bit in my slides. So we'll go through this, and I apologize for we might not be able to read these because of the lighting, but one of the first things I'd like to do is talk about the connection to medical marijuana. So at present, the effective date of this chapter is today. Ironically, we have this event on the first day, so it's important because the Department of Health and medical marijuana remains relevant. The Act incorporates existing medical marijuana entities directly. So they have a definition section, and it's experienced marijuana establishment operator. So basically it sets a threshold where if they've applied to the Department of Health, this is the last sentence, and were issued a provisional registration to operate by the effective date of this chapter. So between October last year and December today, if they have a provisional certificate of registration from the Department of Health, and they're kind of queued up for some of the next steps. And related to the effective date, we started a series of questions. So section 10 in this regulation says that the CCC, Chris covered this, will begin accepting applications on October 1st. And what it says in there, if you read it in there, they'll accept one application for a variety of things. Sorry, it's the second line there. So they're looking for fewer than 75 provisional registrations that have been issued on October 1st. Sorry, I think I have it on the next slide, but anyway, the Department of Health has kept detailed and updated information on the status of medical applications, and what I wanted to show was some of you who have been following the medical marijuana process know that the Department of Health has this chart. This chart is updated weekly. As of right now, it's updated till December 2nd. And as of right now, there have been a total of 204 applications. And they're all in varying degrees. And I realize this is illegible. So they have timelines and benchmarks through their medical marijuana process. But the key one is if an entity has a provisional certificate, there's a date, it's in the last column, and that is when the town pops up on this list. And as of right now, there are 79 medical marijuana entities with provisional certificates. So the legislation, this act says that they want to have 75 by October 1st, and they already have 79. So there's no concern with the ability to get some applicants going. I'm a little challenged because this was a great map. This is a map of all those entities based on the Department of Health's chart. To my knowledge, I've been dealing with this for several years. I've never seen a map of where these are, and so unfortunately, we have a call out here for the Worcester, the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission's area. We did a call out for the Pioneer Valley region, and then we did a call out for the Boston area. Would you go back and see which movie the focus on the monitors or So this is something that I want to post on our website. So there's a key on the right, and it establishes those that, it's a little bit better. It's still illegible, I apologize. But there's 79 of these places all across the state. And it relates to how the writers of this act are using this process to jumpstart their applications. I try to cover this in a minute. Even with the map, there's a variety of local medical marijuana bylaws, and some of these marijuana groups were going to towns and either getting a letter of support or even land use permits before they made their application to the state. So there's one in particular in our region. There was an, the telegram said recently, town approves a special permit for a growing facility, but they haven't applied to the state yet for the medical marijuana. So there's a number of towns that have given some approvals that haven't gone to the state yet. So that list, the 79 approved now, is likely to still jump. I cover that. And again, the question, this is where I want to cover the question about the Act, the Question 4 Act. There's a lot of inconsistencies, and I think the Copeland Cave memo said that generally, but for this medical marijuana component, in one section of the Act, they say it'll be the effective date of the chapter. So that would be, in theory, December 15th, today. So that would cut off the Department of Health approvals, and those before today would be, queued up for the application list. Anything after this wouldn't. But in another section, let me read it. So the Act contains another reference to provisional certificates issued as late as October 2017 as a benchmark. So the later date would allow even more medical marijuana entities to qualify for application. So there's a question there. We're not going to resolve it today, but I think it's something to keep an eye on. A last note on medical marijuana, the Department of Health is still active. So as of August, they extended a key deadline within their process. I'm going to read it anyway, because some of you are clued into this, but under the original law, applicants were required to receive a provisional within 1 year of hitting a certain mark with the Department of Health, but they extended that by a year. So they basically loosened up their process to give these entities more time. And then recently learned that the Department of Health will hold public hearings on certain amendments to the actual medical marijuana legislation. And their description is to update regulations to be consistent with current law, as well as streamline administrative processes and clarify operational issues. So they're holding two public hearings, January 3rd in Boston and January 5th in Hoyle. The proposed amendments are available on their website, and it's like a redline version, and I did breeze through it, and they talk a lot about caretakers and how caretakers can access the medicine, but there's also some clarification on their definitions for what is a provisional certificate and the like, and I am not professing to study that yet, but it's just something I want to mention. And now on to local control options. Before I do that, I want to ask by show of hands, if you're a municipality, how many of you have a medical marijuana bylaw in place? Great, so that's, like 50%. And the opposing question is, as a municipality, how many of you do not have a medical marijuana bylaw in place? So that's 1, 2, so there's, raise them high. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So whereas we have 50% with it, there's like 17 without it. And so I try to weave this through the rest of the presentation because there's a significant question about what happens with towns with the medical marijuana bylaw and what happens to towns without it. And I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to try to raise some of the things that appear to be questions. This is going to be a problem because I don't think anyone's going to really be able to read this. The slides are going to be available after this, but the first section of local control is that a city or town may adopt ordinances and bylaws that impose reasonable safeguards. And so I'm calling out reasonable safeguards. This is similar language to Chapter 40A, which allows the imposition of conditions, safeguards, and limitations on time and use. So that's good. So there's some relation to existing land use law. So safeguards on the operation of marijuana establishments provided they are not So unreasonably impractical. There's a lot of text here. The legislation defines unreasonably impractical, and this is important. A lot of what I'm going to do is use this opportunity of all planners here to really drill into this a little bit for the question and answer, because I would love to hear anyone's input on this or different takes. But unreasonably impractical is that the measure necessary to comply with the regulation or bylaw adopted subject licensees to unreasonable risk or require such a high investment of risk, money, time, or any other resource or asset that a reasonable, prudent business person would not operate such an establishment. So this language is unique and doesn't really correspond to any language in Chapter 48. For example, we are probably familiar with Chapter 48, Section 3. So it includes, the following for certain uses: no zoning ordinance or bylaw shall prohibit or unreasonably regulate. So there's some questions there about what is this going to mean, unreasonably impractical. So I have an attorney friend who basically said that language is going to be tested. It should be determined at some level that a special permit requirement, although it's discretionary, should not be considered unreasonably impractical. There is a substantial amount of case law supporting the special permit process for any uses deemed to require additional scrutiny and the ability for the municipality to deny. The secondary question is, what is an example of something that would achieve unreasonably impractical? So it's worth exploring that as we go along together. So this is let's presume this is a zoning bylaw that you can do. You can govern the time, place, and manner. A lot of this says this is similar to Chapter 48. So if you think of a site plan review, that's what you can do, is you can look at the time, place, and manner, but you can't deny it, basically, with a site plan review. Section 5 of the Act, they really only set very few parameters, and one is that, again, this is in question 4 language, the property where the proposed marijuana establishment is to be located at the time of license application is not located within 500 feet of a pre-existing public or private school. And it's really, it says grades K through 12, unless the city or town adopts a bylaw that reduces that requirement. So they're really saying 500 feet, unless you want to make it less, not more, less. So they kind of set a benchmark there. And I'll just a quick note that they added pre-existing school. So at the time of application, there was a lot of vagueness with the medical marijuana laws about that. So they clarified it. So again, the writers of this have the ability to watch certain processes unfold and learn from their experience in Colorado and Washington as well. Section 4 of the Act sets up a basic framework moving forward that no regulation shall prohibit a medical marijuana treatment center and a experienced establishment from operating a medical treatment center and recreational retail at a shared location. So they basically say you can't prohibit that shared use from happening. So it goes on. So I know this is going to be a little laborious, but these are really important. This is just the first set of local control. So we're talking about a zoning bylaw that has to have certain achievable goals. So you can govern the time, place, and manner, except that a zoning ordinance or bylaw shall not prohibit placing a marijuana establishment in any area where a medical treatment facility is registered for the same activity. So this one raises a lot of questions. First, it seems to suggest that you could say, we don't want them anywhere else in town, but it says you have to allow them where you have a registered marijuana, a registered marijuana facility already. So you can say we don't want it elsewhere, but if you have a marijuana facility, medical marijuana facility, then you have to allow it there. And you can only govern the time and place, and you can't prohibit the shared use. So it's interesting to see how this will unfold. We're calling out the phrase in any area, in any area. So it's unclear, and it's not really similar or compatible to existing language in 40A. So the term areas is pretty vague. It doesn't correlate to a district, for a measured distance or any other geographic reference. So if you have a medical marijuana facility, then in that area, you know, recreational use is allowed, basically. You can govern the time, place, and manner, but you can't prohibit it. So there's a real vagueness here. And it wasn't until very recently that I started to consider the towns that don't have a medical marijuana bylaw and don't have a medical marijuana use. And I will thread through this, but I think for those towns it's actually more of a concern. Whereas it seems like the towns with it might be subject to getting a recreational facility, but it's going to be clued into that area. But a town that doesn't have a medical marijuana bylaw or a facility, it seems like these uses could go anywhere. And so I'll try to go through that in a minute. So it's registered, and then what I was thinking here is the drafters of this may have had a certain intent or may have just messed it up, I'm not sure. And I think that there's a conservative way to see this and a liberal way to see this. So the conservative way is, yes, you have to have a place that's registered. So going back to that map, there's 79. So that's a conservative one. So if they're registered, then that's where the recreational uses are going to go. And that's pretty conservative. But a liberal interpretation of this, and so that's where if this changes, is registered to engage in the same type of activity, and we'll go back to that area. So someone could propose that they messed up and wanted to say that in any district where the use was allowed. And so the reason why I harp on this is because the next couple of slides talk about how you can't really reduce the number of the uses in a town except by referendum. So I know that it's getting a little bit muddy right now, and I hope we come out the other side. But we need to move into the referendum language because it's all connected. So going back, that first section, you create a bylaw, so through town meeting, but you have to allow the uses where you got a registered medical marijuana facility. So that's one thing. So then the referendum says that in order for a town to prohibit or restrict the number, you have to go through the pretty arduous task of having a referendum question. So this is going to take a few minutes to get through because there's a couple components to it. But so in order for a town to limit the number of establishments, so it says you can limit the number of establishments in a town, except that a city or a town may only do this, may only adopt an ordinance by vote of the voters of that city or town. So the language establishes that a referendum vote is required to limit the number with certain thresholds. So there's some notes here. This does not appear to be time limited. So a special vote, a special election could be initiated, and that's a good thing. So the other section I'll get to later is time limited. This one's not. So in theory, a board of selectmen could pick a timeline and put this question forward. And what you can do is it gives local control via the referendum process, and that the board of selectmen could initiate the question. Given the close nature of the votes on question 4, communities may need to carefully assess the potential outcome of that vote. So none of the votes were landslides, so they were all pretty close. And so moving towards this idea of a referendum to prohibit, could have, and this is, you should always consult with your town attorney with all of this, but it's not a slam dunk. So, because that would only require a majority of the voters of the town to chime in. The Mass Municipal Lawyers Association has raised several important questions that must be resolved as they may relate to whether a community could be vulnerable by not putting this question to referendum. So there's a whole bunch of questions that we're not going to be able to solve today, but this referendum process is different, and so it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to figure out how it'll work. So I think quickly here I go through, you could prohibit, the Copeland-Page memo notes the following, that this language is still subject to interpretation and may be addressed by the CCC The form of the question, referendum question, is typically included in the authorizing law, and this act doesn't do that. So it raises a question about exactly what question people will be putting forward. The Board of Selectmen must vote to put the question on the ballot and provide 35 days notice prior to an election. So there's a question about whether they can schedule a special election and just get this issue going. There's an important question as to whether this option is time limited or tied to an election. So that's in the page memo. Okay, so it's given the close nature of the vote. So I think that's a repeat for the other side. This language in the middle here establishes some thresholds. So you could propose to prohibit. You could propose to limit the number to fewer than 20% of the retail alcohol licenses you have in a town, or limit the number of establishments to fewer than the number of treatment centers registered. So I personally have been looking at this for weeks, and it's still not abundantly clear what's happening. But when you add in the question about towns without a medical marijuana bylaw, it might start to shed some light on what's happening. So you could call a referendum to prohibit it, and that's definitely an option. Or you could limit the number to fewer than registered dispensaries, medical dispensaries. But if you don't have a bylaw and you don't have any dispensaries, then you can't do that. You can't do the third one. So you could prohibit. But then it leaves open this question about limiting to 20%, and this seems to suggest that you could prohibit. So this is a town without a medical marijuana bylaw. It appears that you might be able to prohibit it, which is okay. You can try that. But the only other option is to limit it to 20% of the retail alcohol sales in your community. So again, you have no bylaw. You know, these are retail uses that could go basically anywhere. And so the tool would be to limit the number to 20% of alcohol sales. And I see a hand, and we're definitely going to do questions. And I encourage you to take some notes. Test me on any of this, please. So towns without a medical any town should consult their town council. That seems like pretty obvious, but towns without a medical marijuana bylaw should consult their town council regarding how these local control options affect their ability to regulate the recreational uses. Where a community does not have a medical marijuana bylaw, they do not appear to be eligible for so going back to that first standard zoning bylaw process, which says you can regulate that area where you have a registered dispensary. If you're a town that doesn't have a bylaw or a registered dispensary, you can't do that. So there's a real question about, has that eliminated those towns' ability to even do the bylaw and then only go to referendum? So it's a serious consideration. Copeland and Page memo says that under the referendum option there may be ability to prohibit outright. However, it does not seem like they may be able to have a registered dispensary. Sorry to cover that. Sorry. I think basically these questions with the referendum in this section require more careful review. So I'm trying to identify the questions that we have. So that's the initial set of local control. It's the bylaw, or you can regulate where you have a medical dispensary, or the referendum where you can do a certain couple things. So it's loaded. In case I don't say this, I'll say it now just to make sure. For the towns talking about a zoning moratorium, we call it a temporary moratorium. The purpose of those are to plan and assess, and they have to be time specific. You can't have it just bleed out into forever. So zoning moratorium would maybe apply to that first local control that talks about a zoning bylaw. But it's kind of unclear whether a zoning moratorium can do anything about referendum questions, because they're not in the same bucket of regulations. So the town wants to talk about a temporary moratorium. I think the observation is that it would apply to zoning, but it doesn't really affect the referendum question, because the referendum process is regulated by the Secretary of State's office and has a whole set of other requirements. So keeping your eye on that as you move forward and talk through your town's process, that the referendum is new. This is a kind of a new take on how towns are going to regulate something. So then we move on to the on-site consumption referendum. I'm pretty sure everyone's heard this. So if you look ahead, this is going to be something the towns are going to have to deal with. So what it says is that the city council or the board of selectmen shall, upon the filing of a petition signed by 10% of the voters, put this question on the ballot, basically. So the board of selectmen in the other instance could choose to do it. We're choosing to try to prohibit it. In this case, if 10% of the voters organize themselves and file a petition to put this question on the ballot, then the board of selectmen shall put it on. And so this is a little bit of a concern in terms of taking what it appears to be taking away local control. And 10% of the voters is a lot. But if you go back to the votes of every town, conceivably you could get 10%, because a lot of these questions passed by like 54% or failed by 48%. So conceivably 10% is not actually that hard to get. I think that this is not my area of expertise. Go back to the town council and look at this, drill down on this. But the sort of the silver lining, I think, is that this one sets up a timeline. So it sets the next biannual state election is when this would go on the ballot. So by all accounts, that'd be November 2018. So if this is read correctly, the towns may have some time to figure this out, but by November 2018, there will likely be some questions on the ballot about whether a town wants to allow on-site consumption or not. And again, an attorney friend of mine said, nothing in here seems to say that, tomorrow they could file it with a town clerk, but the action wouldn't occur until November 2018. So a lot of questions here. And I think related to this was just knowing that there's a deadline. So if you're talking about November 2018, I think the Secretary of State has all their regulations about the referendum process, and it requires like submission by August. So we're not that far, that's going to be 2018. So in August is the deadline for people to put this question on, whether it's the town or whether it's by 10% of the voters. So this on-site consumption allows the sale of marijuana and marijuana products for consumption on the premises where sold. So I'm really kind of bummed out about these slides. I don't think you want to read them, but the special Senate report, which compared a lot of different things for Colorado and Washington, is silent on this. And some initial research suggests that in Washington and Colorado, cafes and bars, such as in Amsterdam, are not allowed. But some of the Google searches shows that it seems like in Colorado they did have some provisions for private membership clubs to where you could go and have on-site consumption, but it's not like Amsterdam model. So we are, in theory, embarking on a series of towns with questions about whether we want to do this. It's serious. So there are significant questions about how this may or may not be limited by or supersede existing smoking regulations, typically administered by the Board of Health. So no idea how this relates to Board of Health regulations. Something to keep around. Boards of Health are pretty powerful, and they have smoking regulations now that say you can't smoke in public. But for whatever reason, if you go to the VFW in your town, you can seem to smoke there. There are significant questions about the nature of a ballot question and how, if approved, subsequent regulations would be created in associated town administrators. So again, you can imagine 10% of the voters file a petition to town clerk to force the question. It's going to be a question about allowing on-site consumption, but there aren't going to be, I can't imagine there's going to be 10 pages of regulations attached to that. So there's nothing really here that says, if the town says yes to on-site consumption, what then is the timeline to implement a whole series of new regulations for that? So Board of Health regulations on smoking, or I think I have a slide here. This is my fun slide. It's too bad you can't see it. So I'm going to just show this for a second. So on-site consumption. This isn't the 1970s. This is edibles. This could be there's a whole list actually. There's a definition. So the act itself defines it as manufactured products containing marijuana or extracts from marijuana, including concentrated forms, products, and other ingredients that are intended for use for consumption, including edible products, beverages, topical products, ointments, oils, tinctures. There's sprays. So I think I have an anecdotal. This is my anecdote, but existing opportunities for edibles and other methods are innovative now, and there's no way to fully understand how this aspect of products may evolve now that it's legalized. So, with the on-site consumption thing, I think it's important to not just imagine someone smoking a joint or whatever. There are countless ways that people will be able to consume it on a site, and that's important. And related to this, so again, the writers of this act seem to have had their act together in considering it. So there's a section 4B1 which gives the Cannabis Control Commission the following authority. So in furtherance of the intent, the Commission may also adopt regulations in accordance with 38 of the general laws, which establish and provide for issuance of additional types or classes of licenses to operate marijuana-related businesses, including licenses that authorize limited cultivation process. That wasn't my key point. So they can create regulations and licenses that authorize the consumption of marijuana or marijuana products on the premises where sold, licenses that authorize the consumption of marijuana at special events in limited areas and for limited time, and for scientific research. So I think I get to the slide in a second, but this to me started to raise some comparisons to a liquor license process. So in your town, you have liquor licenses, so that's retail, you have the bars that have a liquor license, and you have the one-day events, the special licenses for weddings or something. So they're really a little bit of Pandora's box here. And then the edibles. So just again, I can't reiterate it enough. This isn't necessarily smoking a joint. This could be a wide array of possibilities. This is not my area of expertise, but the Mass Municipal Lawyers Association, their memo, which again is on our website, they pretty much honed in on the referendum question. So it's good because they're a bunch of lawyers and they're the ones who should dissect that part. They cite some ambiguity about the referendum process for on-site consumption, and they raise a question about what if there's no valid question for a vote to disallow it. So the language says if you send it to the voters and they say no, that's fine. But if you don't do anything with it, they as a bunch of lawyers, there's a question. Like, I think the question is, does the town have to at least put it to the voters to clarify their position? That I think you'll see, hopefully will get worked out and articulated with a bunch of lawyers and the legislature, hopefully. So I am nearing the end of my presentation, and the important part is going to be a facilitated question and answer session. So anything that we're touching on that you think is a question or you want to reiterate it or raise another one, it's really important. This slide will be better served looking at it online after this, but the timelines, the state treasurer said it, they're too short, but and the Mass Municipal Association, so that's all the town administrators and public officials have raised questions about the timeline being too short. But I think it's important to kind of put a finer point on it, and I'm going to try my best to do this. So the top row is the recreational marijuana timeline. So its effective date is today, February 1st. The advisory board is formed. 1 month later, the control commission is formed. And basically from the formation, the time for state agencies to prepare regulations goes all the way to September 15th. So they have a fair amount of time to look at this, and it says by September 15th they shall have initial regulations. But if you look closer, October 1st, 15 days later, then the CCC starts taking in applications. And from there, the CCC has 90 days to issue it or refuse it. And that's where you get to the January. There's a lot of conversation about that. If there's no regulations, a medical marijuana place could switch to recreational by January 18th. That's why that's there. So if they haven't done any of this by January, then the legislation says that a medical marijuana dispensary can start selling recreational. I don't know that that's the biggest concern we have, but if regulations are not created until September 15th, and they start accepting applications 15 days later, then I think we move into the town's timeline. So we're here today, and there's a whole bunch of questions. February 1st, basically time for municipalities to plan without the benefit of any vetted regulations. We have this first round from basically today to, let's say, mid-April. So if you're thinking about a spring town meeting, you have warrant deadlines, let's say mid-April. So you have from now till mid-April as this first round to start looking at this, but there's no regulations in place. Those regulations aren't going to be in place until September 15th. So I can understand why a lot of towns are talking about temporary moratoriums. Makes sense. But it goes back to the other point about making sure there's an understanding about what a moratorium can deal with, which is zoning. So the referendum questions seem to be in another bucket. So May town meetings, the spring town meetings for most people, one of the goals here is we see a likelihood that a lot of towns would pursue temporary moratoriums, and that makes sense. So it would be great if there was some consistency in that language. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this is where creativity in moratorium language is probably not a great idea, because the Attorney General's office, the municipal law unit, is definitely paying attention to this as well. And so I run the rest of the timeline, and it's not clear that 1 year is really enough. So here we are in May. Let's assume that some people have enacted temporary moratoriums. And so the next opportunity really is November. So spring town meeting, fall town meeting. Again, this summer, we'll hope for some regulations, but this is empty because the state, the CCC group, is working on regulations all the way up until September 15th. So by that time, towns could and probably should, and we can help, work on some model bylaw language for regulating this, but it's going to be quite an exercise if there's no regulations to actually drill down on. So it'd be very vague. So looking at the timeline, September 15th, if I have my town meeting schedules right from the good old Amherst days, sometime in October, Board of Selectmen are finalizing the warrant. It starts to go through the parade of the Finance Committee, and the Planning Board has to hold a public hearing. The Planning Board has to have something, so not until September 15th do they have to have regulations, and then not in November, but October 1st they start reviewing and accepting licenses. So this is where the timeline is, I think, critical. And one of the things that we can try to help you do is look at that, and that is the kind of thing that you may want to send to your legislator. Because you all may go back and talk to your counterparts and obviously want to focus on your town, but the time to act is right now to send some messages to the legislators so they know this. So they can only know what they're being told. So it doesn't really end here. So January 2018, but there's a big question about what towns will be able to do in November. And what I tried to do is I tried to have another slide, but I couldn't get it together in time. So So then you imagine referendums and longer moratoriums, and so it elongates out past January. So then you enter into that next year's cycle of spring town meeting and fall town meeting, and there's just so many questions. I couldn't get it all together for today, but I think my goal was to articulate just the beginning of the timelines is really tight and somewhat impractical for communities to meet. This slide will be available. It's it's unofficial, but I think it was worth spending 5 minutes on, or 10 minutes. Real quick, other issues. I wanted to touch on local licensing, host community agreements, and regulations which do not conflict. So local licensing, I asked a series of questions, rhetorical ones, but could the creation of local licensing bylaw, such as a general bylaw, be considered one of those available to towns? So again, the local control is the city or town may adopt ordinances and bylaws, so it's multiple, as long as they impose reasonable safeguards and are not unreasonably impractical. So would or could it be considered a reasonable safeguard, or would it be considered unreasonably impractical to have a local license, like your select board, like a liquor license? So it's worth research, especially because in 3 places in this act, it refers to alcoholic beverages as regulated under Chapter 138. This may, in my opinion, seem to open the door to at least this question. Would it be unreasonably impractical to create a local license requirement when you compare a retail marijuana dispensary to some other uses that are commonly regulated by both land use and local licensing? So some of you may know this. Auto dealerships, common victualer's license, so basically every restaurant gets a local license. In-holder license, lunch carts or food trucks, coin-operated amusement devices, and liquor license. So both retail, bars, and special events. So as this all unfolds, this is something to keep your eye on and talk to your town council about and consider whether this is an option. It's not really in the legislation, but it does allow towns to create bylaws and ordinances. So this is important, I think. This is the 3 references. So in 138, this is the the alcohol licensing process. So local licensing authorities are defined. So for some reason, the writers of that question 4 felt like they could compare some parts of this process to Chapter 138. And so I think the question is, what about other processes? What about other parts? Can they kind of connect to this? Host community agreements. The language says that no agreement between a city or town or marijuana establishment shall require payment of a fee to that city or town that is not directly proportional and reasonably related to the costs imposed. Any cost to a city or town by the operation of an establishment shall be documented and considered a public record as defined by a certain general law. It's important because for those communities that went through the medical marijuana process and the letter of non-opposition, that was definitely a point where a lot of communities sought a host community agreement with those groups. There was no documentation really required. Those numbers seemed to be creative in some of the numbers and agreements that were made. And ironically, a lot of those, it seems like, from what I'm told, a lot of them actually expired if the group became recreational. And I think no one really knew that this language was going to be in here, so towns are trying to be safeguarding themselves that this is going to expire if there's recreation. But here we are with actually I think the writers of this were successful in saying, well, we're not going to get some unreasonable cost imposed upon us. So it's a little bit different than the medical marijuana process. So there's one guidance document out there that asserts that a written agreement between a town and a group that says you shall not operate recreationally is sort of null and void, in that this act, the language, supersedes that. So there's a lot of questions here I'm not going to answer today, but we'll see that coming up. This is very general. regulation's not in conflict, so it's a test for all of us moving forward. So in the act, it says regulations made pursuant shall not prohibit treatment center, so that's a medical marijuana treatment center and an experienced marijuana establishment from operating together. That's basically what it says. But it says that any law going forward or regulation can't conflict with the whole framework of this act, all the language of the act. So that's something to keep your eye on. So here, we're gonna do a facilitated question and answer session. So again, I know that this was a little laborious, but our intent was to go through it. Obviously there's questions, and I think the best possible scenario is for all the expertise in this room to ask some questions. We're gonna try to just type them up on the screen. It's a little bit of an experiment, but we wanna hear what people are thinking. And we also think that everyone else in the room hearing other people's questions is really important. So again, you're gonna go back to your towns and you're gonna work on what you need to work on. But this is a good session to see that this is a great turnout. There's a lot of towns here, and so you're not the only town worried about this or thinking about this. So the question and answer, I want to try to make this as productive as possible. We're going to type it up, and then if we can, we're going to try to capture the essence of those main questions and try to communicate that to, from the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission to, our local legislator. But the reminder is that you as a community should also consider writing to your legislator. Obviously you have to have discussion with your boards and things like that, but take some time to write now, because I think it looks like coming January is when the legislature is going to look at this and they should know what your issues and concerns are. So just give us a second to pull up the typing. It's happening now, and I think what we have is we have some of our staff on each side of the room, so we have a microphone. Just wait for the microphone, it'll come right to you. And just, I think if you state your town or affiliation, we would just want to throw that up there, and then we'll try to articulate the question. So wait for the mic, say your town or affiliation, and then we'll see how this goes. By show of hands, does anyone want to ask questions? That's pretty good. I hope there's more. So let's turn it over. Okay, we're going to start over there.
Lucky me. I'm from the town of Lunenburg.
Okay.
It's green, so it's on, right?
It's on, yeah. It's just talk loud.
That's never been a problem for me. So we're talking a lot about the interplay between medical marijuana facilities and these new recreational facilities. And you mentioned that they would be allowed where registered facilities were currently located. So should a town have a bylaw, but has not had any registered facility approach them or locate there, do we have any idea of how recreational will play with the existing bylaw with the lack of an actual facility?
You're laughing at my typing.
Yeah, we're going to try to type that up. I think it's a great question, and I don't know that I have the answer. I think I will harken back to, so how will recreational play out in a community that has a bylaw, but no registered
facility. I think
Yeah.
that's probably not an uncommon situation, especially with the limited number of operating registered facilities.
Yeah. I think, well, it's registered, yeah, so it's got to be registered by the state. So on that, I guess the questions need to be posed. We need to figure out who those questions should go to. So it seems like the legislature needs to know that there's a question there. So it's that faulty language about an area. So we don't really talk about zoning in terms of that area over there. And we normally don't place one spot. That's sort of not encouraged. So there's a question of whether that needs to change and can be clarified. And again, my point was, it could go, in theory, it could go either way. It could go a conservative way, or it could go a liberal way. And when you look at the whole picture, if you're a town that doesn't even have a medical marijuana bylaw, then that option's not even really available to even consider the bylaw. So it opens it up to, it seems to open it up to the whole town. Like, what does your zoning bylaw say about retail? And then if you follow that thread for a second, what's your town think about retail? It's not really defined. Then there's no way to limit that. except if you public referendum the question to do the 20% liquor license, or you prohibit it outright. So that's a great question. All right, so you want to wait for, yeah, okay, he's got a mic back there. Raise your hand high if you want to ask a question.
Town of Auburn. Question being related to accessory use. I mentioned this at the legislative breakfast. So what's to stop any business, restaurant, bar, CVS, anything from deciding that they wanted to sell this stuff as an accessory use over the counter? We haven't, I know it's a little farther down the road and such, but I haven't heard any legislation about it, or hasn't come up in the past. I just want to make sure that we're considering that as prohibiting it and making sure that this is only a singular main primary use. And whether it's to be at an existing R&D or a standalone facility, I guess my caution really is accessory use as a joint business with some other venture. And it would be my prerogative anyway to try to prohibit it.
So I think that's a great question, and that needs to be clarified. What I was able to glean from the language is that there is some definition in there about accessory items. So if you're a store that sells growing equipment, then you're not even in this realm. It doesn't appear to be regulated because you're not selling the product. So, and we have that now. If you go around, there's hydroponic places and things like that. So that's not really even achieving this. Doesn't appear to achieve this act. But so your comments about if CVS, which would be ironic, wants to sell gummy bears. The only thing I can recall off the top of my head from this legislation is that after January 2018, then it appears to stop front-loading the medical marijuana people, and it would open up the application process to everyone else. So anyone else with a business model who can create a product like that would then get into the second round of applications with the Department of Health, and then get funneled into the process. And that's where you get to that question of the 20% limitation on the number. So there could be opportunities for there to be a lot, but it would, and the state might not regulate it. They might say, application's complete. If the town hasn't prohibited it and the town allows it, then what? And so the local licensing question kind of comes up again. Would a select board have the authority or the interest to regulate that kind of item? So they regulate a lot already. I went through that list, so that's a great question. I don't know who's going to figure it out, but that's the kind of thing that the legislature should understand, that there's those level of questions.
So first of all, I'm from Royalston, but in this context, I'm a member of the Central Region Homeland Security Council. Similar to Auburn's, to dig a little deeper to where wording needs to be cleaned up would be under the new 94G Section 2 paragraph November N. The definition of a marijuana establishment, does that require it be a standalone dedicated unit, or can any 7-Eleven or mom and pop store that sells tobacco and alcohol today, can that be a marijuana establishment, which is not under local control? The state would make that determination. But the definition there of that chapter is not really clean about what isn't a marijuana establishment. Retail, actually it's called marijuana retailers.
Pretty soon, hopefully, other people will want to start trying to tackle some of these. But I think what isn't a marijuana retailer, and I think it goes to, if I could tag along with that, is there's a definition now, but it appears that at a certain point, they stop referring to the medical marijuana people and open it up. And that's, what happens after they stop using the medical marijuana licenses as the initial round, it opens it up to, I think it's the same thing as similar to the Auburn question about then, the accessory sales and other sales that we may not even be imagining it.
Hi, Councilman Amherst. I have two questions hopefully they're clarifications. The prohibition, or the fact that you can't prohibit a recreational marijuana shop where a registered medical marijuana, the word registered, we're assuming or we can confirm that that's provisional certificate of registration and not final certificate of registration? Do we know that?
Yeah, we should know that, and that, it's like the prohibit recreational, the benchmark is, right now, as written, it's a provisional certificate. It's not the final certificate.
Okay.
So that's in the definitions.
The second question was, on your timeline, there was a note at the bottom, and I believe it says that any entity that applies for a license to operate a recreational facility, the zoning is in place as of the date of application. So if they apply on the first date, October 1st, and you haven't had your fall town meeting yet, so really, if you want to be fully prepared, you need to do it in Springtown or before October 1st. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's correct. So, and this is only the best that I could do with this. In here, it's kind of, the whole act is not coherently laid out. So you have to be reading through it. You get to a point in it, and you're like, oh, well, that contradicts something else it says. So there is language in there that applications get accepted on October 1st. And then when you go into the process under the CCC, they kind of lay out a preliminary process. And it's in there that it says that the CCC will look at the zoning in place at the time of application. So yeah, it makes that clock a little different. It's a great question. I think that needs to be, as a town, you need to get some clarification on how that will work. All of this is going to be an exercise for towns to work through. Oh, who has the microphone? Oh, okay.
So, I'm Stephen Morrison. A couple of things. So this is on home growth. I know that you wanted to delay that to some other time, but this has to do with what kind of bylaws and regulations we can establish. This home growth, I'm allowed 12 plants. A marijuana plant can produce over a pound every 90 days, so 18, 20 ounces. If I got 12 of them at the end of the year, I've made a bale of 50 pounds of marijuana. Can we do anything about, what do you do with the excess? What will people do? Can they put it out curbside with the trash?
I didn't say that.
Maybe not. So I bail that for half the price. So can I do something about this excess? By the way, I can gift you an ounce. Is that per day, for the fortnight, per hour? That might get rid of the 50 pounds. And then in addition, each of those plants, certain times of the growth cycle, take 3 gallons per plant of fertilized water. So in a given day, I've got a bathtub full of fertilized water runoff. Can you put that in a storm drain, or that you flush it down the sewer system? What can the town do about this runoff? Again, I don't expect to have an answer to that question.
Good.
So Jim, you can.
I'm going to give him a break. I'm going to play devil's advocate with you and just sort of play this game of, what if. So you've got these 12 plants, and you get up to your 10 ounces that you're allowed possession in your home. At that point, you better start transferring.
Now, I'm allowed 10 ounces and 12 plants.
Okay, but the plants have not yet been cultivated.
Correct.
Okay, so you've got the plants, but as you harvest, you can accumulate up to that 10-ounce point. And at that point, then you start taking it into your car, where you could have 1 ounce.
But I can't just move the car.
And maybe on your person, you can have another ounce. But truthfully, what I see is happening is once you accumulate to that 10 ounces, you need to start transferring. You need to start gifting. Christmas becomes much more interesting.
The gentleman there, yeah. Try to go right in the mic. That's all right.
Town Webster?
Yeah, thanks.
Has the state given any consideration for medical marijuana facilities that are in the process of being approved in a town? We have a medical marijuana facility that is in the process right now of getting approved by the town. They came before the planning board for a site plan review. They were approved. I don't know if they've been registered. I don't think they have been yet. But is there any consideration for those facilities that are in the process but have not yet been registered?
It's a great question. And I tried to raise what I could see as an inconsistency in the language, which is at one point in the definition section, they define an experienced marijuana establishment as someone who has a provisional certificate from the state by the effective date of the act. And so I think the reading of that is December 15th. But somewhere else in the text, it says that they'll actually consider it until October 2017. So there's definitely a need to clarify that. It's a great question, and I don't know how to answer it. There might be an opportunity for a medical marijuana facility to stay that course and just do that. Or they could double up and circle back and, yeah, I don't know. That's a good one.
I'm Katie Tyler from New Braintree, and I have a basic question. I don't know if, I'm one of the 15 towns that doesn't have a marijuana bylaw. So if there are other towns in the CMRPC district that have one in place that are willing to share a sample, could somebody email me one? And my email address is selectboard, all one word, at newbraintree, all one word, .org. That would be great. Thanks.
Just a question, Henry Brooks from Leicester. Question about the $100 fine. It's a civil fine, correct?
That's the way it's written, yeah.
So it won't be able to be criminally brought up to receive that money when they don't pay anything about the last thing, it's just smoking marijuana.
I am no expert in the law enforcement arena, but the little that I did read is that there are higher penalties for selling it without a license. So there's higher penalties, and it could be criminal for selling it without a retail license. So that's going to go to that criminal level. But I would call your attention to the document written by, his name's Daniel Bennett. He's the secretary of the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. And so he's basically the top official in Massachusetts for the law enforcement end of this. And yesterday, again, I go back to this, yesterday they published an 8-page memo for law enforcement officials to prep for this. So one day to prep. So it outlines all the criminal and civil penalties pretty well from what I can breeze through. So this is a document I would intend to put on our website today, but Googling it, Boston Globe has it as an attachment in one of their articles today. This gentleman's been waiting a few minutes, so let's get this.
I am from Millbury, Massachusetts. Question about the money and the finances. Has there been any input from the financial industry? Because most of the money in terms of marijuana is a cash business because banks don't want to touch it because of interstate commerce, federal regulations, and the fact that marijuana is still federally illegal. How do we go about, are we going to have any issues accepting money based upon the marijuana trade? And has the financial industry stepped
Yeah, and I would just add to the after the banks, I would add including receiving money from the local tax. I have no idea. Definitely not my area of expertise, but I think if you would imagine that the state is getting the excise tax, and it was kind of quickly shown in there, but the state excise tax is going to pay for the implementation and monitoring of this whole program. So I don't know if it's correct to say that if the state is going to try to accept the money, then maybe the towns will be able to accept it as well. It's going to be distributed from the state to the towns.
But the state uses the bank.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that there's an overarching question about the whole federal government part of this, but again, it just seems like full steam ahead, and who knows what's going to happen come January due to the change of administration. So,
Tom Grafton. Clarification sounds as if the limitation on the placement of these types of facilities has been greatly undermined with the recent language. Medical, it sounded as if it was 500 feet from where a place of children commonly congregate, which is very vague and open and could include karate facilities and other sorts of things, whereas it seems as if the newer language for recreational is a school by true school definition of K through 12. Not even necessarily satellite schools or community colleges or daycares or any of those other types of even private schools from that standpoint. So clarification, did that really undermine the ability to limit 500 feet to much less than, say, it was under medical?
seems like on the surface it did, and the way it's set up is that's going to be the state's criteria. So they are going to get an application and they're going to go through and find that it's in compliance with their regulations. And then it says that a town could go less than that, 500 feet. And so, there's that test of whether future regulations from a local level will be in conflict with this. So that's a challenge, and I think it's the kind of thing that, again, I'm gonna repeat this probably several more times, but that's the kind of thing that the legislature should be aware of, and then if they choose not to address it, then, and I've been sort of, I think, collectively trying to figure out what's after the legislature. So they might choose to do some stuff, they might choose to extend the deadline, or they could choose to do nothing. Then it seems like the next opportunity is to work with the Cannabis Advisory Board, that 15-member board comprised of pretty much marijuana professionals and very few local representatives. So that was the Mass Municipal Associations. That letter, which is posted on our website, is actually the most aggressive pushback on this that I saw anywhere, and they push back on that advisory board as being one-sided and should be, the composition should be considered. So that MMA letter is actually really good. It's worth reading because it really captures a lot of the things that we're already highlighting, you guys are concerned with, but the MMA, is called out, those issues. And I think that that's one thing that I hope comes across here is that from the top all the way to a local municipality, everyone's looking at this, and you've got some great people who have raised concerns to the legislature. So I think the idea of you as a town can bolster that and keep letting them know that you specifically have concerns, because the state treasurer, the Senate president, the MMA, the MMLA, there's a committee report. So there's a lot of groups that have already expressed some of these concerns, but I think reminding them that you're here too is important. Yep.
Okay. All right. Yep. Okay. I'm Jody Hensley. I'm currently the school committee chair in Westboro, but I've been looking at these marijuana ballot question laws pretty closely for the last 5 years. I worked with the Massachusetts Prevention Alliance, and I was the lead plaintiff on a case that went to the Supreme Judicial Court in June, working to either nullify or clarify the ballot question, which we said was written to confuse It was very hard to get media attention, focused on the fact that this 8,490 word law was very, very difficult to understand. But now we are past the election, and I think the people of the Commonwealth are beginning to wake up to the fact that this language is very, very difficult to understand. Again, I come at this from a drug abuse prevention perspective, and just 8 days after the election, the United States Surgeon General published a major report on facing addiction in America, and among the report's findings were many scientific findings on the long-term consequences of marijuana use, particularly the new concentrates and edibles and wax and dabs and shatters in concentrations of THC that we have never really seen at a population level. So quite honestly, we're in the middle of a new population level consumer product for which we do not know what the consequences are. I was in Boston last week, and there is a new legislative working group that is going to be formed and start working January through March. It'll be headed up by Senator Jason Lewis and Senator Ross.
So what if we do an opt-out site and then somebody comes back and does a referendum for on-site consumption? Does the opt-out vote taken first nullify any future referendum or petition for on-site consumption?
Those are good ones. There was something you had said early on that I thought was important. After the drug abuse prevention, if you can add, I don't know, with the, is the mouse working? No, you can add it at the end. I think it was the complex nature of the question. I think that was something that is important. We've got this is a great room of professional people who, we all might be, or maybe I am, but we're all kind of scratching our heads. So we're looking at this really carefully. So for the average person to have understood what is happening, I think that's the complexity of the question. Yep. And then, so the opt-out vote in the spring, that's the prohibition question. Does that automatically say that you don't want on-site consumption, or do you need 2 questions? And based on everything I've been hearing, it's probably like 2 questions, the way it's written is that you might not be able to do it all in one shot.
Thank you.
That's just the conservative.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Richard, question, in gifting, would plants be considered marijuana, so you could gift plants? Or, and also, would seeds, are seeds considered marijuana, harvested product, are they plants, or none of the above?
I don't know. It's not clear to me about plants. I don't know. It's measured in weight, or at least that's what I can recall from reading this several times. Is it's just weight. So I don't know. And seeds, someone could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but seeds are like not even included in this. So
they're in the definition.
They're in the definition.
Yeah. Plants and seeds are listed in the definition as marijuana.
Okay.
But the stalks.
So would that that clarifies something else. It clarifies something else that I know I had heard people raise questions about. Well, seeds. How are people going to get the seeds? But if it's wrapped into a definition effective today, just saying, maybe seeds are just as part of this. The good thing is that probably people who are abiding by the law might try to plant some seeds today. It's going to take them a couple months to get something. And to the point of the maximum growth per plant is probably for an expert. So maybe if there's amateurs, they're going to fail a couple times, be as successful.
I'm with Fairhaven, and I've got a question more on the moratorium aspect of it. You went through that whole timeline, and my reading is that, well, there's no way we're going to be even prepared because we won't know what the regulations are until the fall. Has CMRPC and the other RPAs talked about drafting up a moratorium template that we can look at, because I'm looking at my timeline. In order to do the research and after everything's done, the earliest town meeting I could get to would be my May of 18 town meeting, and then it's not effective until usually right around July 1st when the Attorney General approves it. By the time we get it, the end of June at the earliest. So can we look at doing the moratorium, a draft template that, because we don't want to, as you said, get creative and take that to July 1st of 18, because that's the earliest it would be any bylaw that I could get to be enacted.
Well, I think you're raising a good point, which is you might enact an initial moratorium, and then how long will it take to get regulations in place, prepped, and at another town meeting to adopt? And that's why I think the timeline goes way out. And I couldn't figure out that slide. So yeah, there's a good point there, which is you could set a moratorium for a year, but it doesn't look like the year is enough to then have the town go through the process of creating the regulations and get it to that November or even later, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just saying that our town meeting annual is every May. In the 15 years I've been there, we've had maybe 7 fall town meetings, not that many. So I'm immediately looking at a moratorium this May that wouldn't expire until July 1st of 18, because May of 18 is the earliest that I feel I can get it in front of the town.
Yep.
Guaranteed.
It's a good point, and I think you know, the executive director and I and Chris have had some discussion about this, and I think getting the RPAs together and some kind of working group as well over the next month or two makes some sense. But you know, there's even that, in my opinion, comes with an asterisk, which is this is a very highly confusing law. It's a brand new law, and so there needs to be some legal counsel involved. And I don't know where we are with that kind of setup. We need to make sure that there's a legal review component of that if we embark on this. This is such a nuanced issue that, you know, it's, well, especially without an extension of the timeline. If there were an extension of the timelines, then I think that would make a ton of sense. And I think that's something we want to do. And I think Janet wants to talk about that. No, okay.
Thank you, Adam. Adam just mentioned that KP Law, formerly Copeland and Page, put together a draft moratorium wording. So if you use KP Law as your town council, please reach out to them. And you can certainly share that with us, and we'll share it with everyone else.
Good answer, thank you. I think the gentleman in the back there.
I wasn't going to talk, but since my colleague from Westboro, I wasn't going to talk, but when my colleague from Westboro School Committee talked, I started talking, I figured I'm from Leominster, and I concur with her regarding the question about the drug use or drug addiction, because it is a bona fide concern. Because I'm not just on the school committee, I'm an RN, so I've seen on both vestiges of drug use. The concern about the THC concentration in the recreational marijuana versus the medical marijuana, that's a concern. Also, regarding the pesticides, what use of the pesticides are in the marijuana plant? Because for the longest time, whatever marijuana was being harvested and being brought from overseas, from Colombia, it had a high dose of pesticides in it. And that's the part that no one talks about, the side effects of the pesticides in the marijuana. Secondly, everyone's talking about stores opening up and this and that. You have to remember, there's home rule in Massachusetts. If a city or town decides not to have it, they have that right by home rule. Thirdly, there's a place in Cambridge that they're selling marijuana today. What do they do? How do they jump through the hoops to be opening up today? Because I feel like we're trying to reinvent the wheel here if there's already some stores that are already opened up.
Those are good questions. And Cambridge, you mentioned?
Yeah, it was on TV. The guy, he was opening up his doors today.
Do you think it was a medical marijuana facility?
No. It was just, come in and buy it. How did he do it? What did he do? It's Cambridge. I know it's Cambridge, but you know, if Cambridge, well, you know, you can laugh all you want, but we're the ones that look like a bunch of schmucks. What did they do that we haven't done?
Well, maybe at the 5 o'clock news, there'll be a section on the police there. There was a question up here too.
I'm from East Hampton, and so we have an approved medical marijuana dispensary and grow facility in one of our mill buildings of 30,000 square feet. My question is in regards to the security measures that under the DPH regs they're required to do, and they have like casino level security measures in this facility. It's incredible. So how is that going to get resolved with the recreational? Will the recreational policies have the same level of security? Will it be equitable to the medical marijuana facilities in terms of the level of securities that they're required to have under the DPH regs? As I was driving in here today, I was listening to the radio and they were talking about a dispensary opening in Alaska. Today's their first dispensary is opening up recreationally. They're expecting huge long lines because they're only allowing 8 people in the facility at a time. And so I think that's sort of like another impact locally that we could be seeing if the security measures are strong enough in a retail facility, how that might impact congestion on the street and any other measures.
I had a question about demand for the retail. I know that
I can only speak to the demand part because I think the demand was a question in Amherst. So Amherst was reviewing a lot of medical marijuana facilities, and based on the Department of Health's projection, it would be fairly limited the number of people who would have access to a medical marijuana card. And so things like traffic and parking were kind of hinging on a fairly limited number of people who could access the facility at one time. And so there are questions at the local permitting level about what happens when you open it up, especially if there are only a few that exist. The demand for those few may be very high. The security is a good question, Jessica. I think that's great. There is some language in here that the CCC will regulate security, and it's pretty vague, but I would imagine, so there's a section in here that talks about it, but I would imagine that that would be the kind of thing that they start to piece together once they create the regulations. So if you looked at the medical marijuana process when the ballot initiative passed, it was more detailed than this. It was a little bit different, but it was still a framework that they spent a lot of time to fill in. And if there was one lesson learned with the medical marijuana provision, it was that the state can be slow or not able to move quickly, but they're going to be spending resources on creating this process and the regulations. And unfortunately, towns are often slower to be able to respond. And so I think that there were some changes in the medical marijuana process and regulations that a lot of towns didn't really catch up with. And it's no fault of anyone, it's just happened fast, and then the towns were stuck with their bylaws created in 2012, 2013. So there's an aspect of this moving target to watch even as we go through this whole process.
Did you read the article you sent me last night as far as the homegrown and it has to be locked?
No, do you want?
So in the article that I read last night that Jeff forwarded to me from Mass Live, the governor had sent out certain sections of the law. And when you grow it at home, it does need to be in a locked facility. Once it's cultivated, it needs to be locked as well. And I think if it's outside, Jim, you're nodding your head, maybe you read this or not, but does it need to be fenced in?
Can't be out, well, it'd be difficult to be outside. It cannot be visible without binoculars, a drone, or
The helicopters that fly near the first frost.
plus it's gotta be maintained between 71 and 80 degrees. I think that'd be a little tough today.
Right, so it'd be tough for Christmas presents.
I think we'll do you next. I think that there's a really good question here about the local licensing option and whether that would be deemed unreasonably impractical. So I know that the conversation has been, what about requiring some sort of license, a local license for home growing operations. So that may be something to pursue. You can imagine that that will be fought. I think that would be right up there with the main thing that the will of the voters saw. The will of the voters probably saw certain things, the personal possession and personal consumption, and probably some of them were clued into the growing. I don't know that a lot of them thought about their retail, how their retail establishment would function in their town, but there seems to be a question whether a local bylaw or ordinance and how far that could go regulating aspects of this. So I think that the homegrown question should be posed to the legislature to see if they feel like they can amend the language at all at their first shot, or whether they will sort of punt that down the road to the advisory board and things like that.
Okay, wrapping also. There are a couple of points that have been going by here that I hope we can get some look into and some help with. First of all, on the moratorium, I know usually they want to define length of time, as you said. This is a special, I think there's a strong argument that this is a special situation where you know that you can't even start looking at it until some unknown time when quite a ways out, when there'll be rules that you can build your regulations under. So could we look a little harder at the possibility of being able to write a moratorium that says until 6 months or until a year after initial regulations or whatever are published or become effective. The other one that I'm concerned with is this point that was raised about accessory use. I've thought, I read all of this and thought about zoning, I've thought in strictly in terms of principal uses, and our zoning controls principal uses. I find accessory uses to be a very flexible, let's say, situation within regulation in town. Things get done as accessory uses that you might not want to allow or you might not allow as principal uses. So I'm wondering what constructs we can have or can't have in our zoning to say, for example, that this is not allowed, the business is not the home, but the businesses are not allowed as accessory uses and are only allowed as principal uses, which are regulated under principal use. This gets down as far as, you said the next to the tobacco in CVS, that kind of thing. And that does concern me some.
Yep, and I think if we can add after uses right here.
I'm trying to figure out the right principle codes.
That's the correct one.
Is it?
Yeah.
Thank you. When I'm publicly typing, I have to make sure.
Just
These aren't my own school notes.
If you could add after uses in terms of zoning, I think is the first question there. But again, I think this is a great session. So obviously we're not answering questions today. We're just getting them all out there. But if you think about a retail use, so the CVS, so most zoning bylaws call that retail and consider it pretty benign. Some towns probably wouldn't even do site plan review for that. Some will do site plan review. There needs to be some consideration about retail sale of marijuana and how would you regulate that, whether it be special permit or site plan review, something like that. But then when you get to tobacco within CVS, and I looked to some colleagues in Amherst there, doesn't the Board of Health then regulate tobacco at that more micro level? So if you think of this as a tiered system, what I was trying to raise is, can you do local licensing and have it not in conflict with this? Because not only do you get the select boards potentially involved with like regulating like a alcohol license, but maybe you can bring in the boards of health for the accessory uses like that, that little, freezer thing where there's some products there. So that could maybe the Board of Health could be brought in, and I think the Board of Health are equipped for that kind of thing. So they do food inspections, they look at all that kind of stuff. So I think if there's a natural tendency to look not to zoning necessarily to do accessory, uses, but to look at the next level in of regulation.
The thing is that zoning is something that town meeting can do, and that the citizens have a chance to control. They have, there's like a 3-member board of health, and the citizens really don't have any direct influence on them. So zoning is a place that I think people will want to look. Our zoning is built to find the best description of particular use. If you don't speak directly to marijuana sale, then maybe it's retail only.
Yeah.
Retail. If for medical, we were in that situation. We had medical came in, all we had was retail, so it was under retail. We added a bylaw to better describe that specific use, medical marijuana. Now it controls that, but that still is a principal use.
Yeah, and I hadn't, so I see the woman there with a question. I think Chris wanted to respond to something, and then this gentleman has a question as well, so you may be next. I had intended to speak about zoning bylaws, so sometimes they're permissive, and the permissive bylaw says, well, it's retail. They find the use it's most similar to and say, there you go, it's retail. That's a permissive bylaw. And some bylaws are prohibitives, which says like, if it's not in the use table, we don't allow it. But that would be, I think, that would be in conflict with this. So if you're a town without a medical marijuana bylaw and you say, well, we don't allow it, then it looks like it may not pass this conflict test. So it's going to force towns to deal with that.
I wanted to handle your question about the moratoria, because it actually makes a lot of sense to try in some way to tie the timeline of your moratorium to the promulgation of the rules and regulations. But I think the concern that Jeff and I had in terms of having a conversation about this is whether it would be nebulous enough and not pass muster at the Attorney General's, because it would be a novel, kind of a test case of coming up with a moratorium with that kind of creative language in it. Again, I think if maybe there could be some sort of an opinion, maybe released by the Attorney General's office that maybe would give some guidelines in terms of creative moratorium timelines, I think that would be useful before somebody went out and spent the money on a town meeting and put that language together only to have it kicked back. That makes a great deal of sense.
Thanks. The woman in the back then here.
So the town of Concord has a medical marijuana zoning district, and it's limited to a very specific area. So if I understand correctly, the town could adopt a bylaw that prohibits marijuana establishments anywhere else in town except in that current district where medical marijuana is permitted. And my second part would be, but we would still need to do a vote regarding prohibiting consumption on the premises.
Yeah, that's great. That was better than I probably hacked through that before. The only caveat is that the way that this is worded is it doesn't say that. It says in an area where you have a registered, approved.
Which we don't have.
Exactly. So that's the ambiguity, in my opinion, with that. The concern being that that's where you have a kind of a conservative interpretation, which would be you need to have a registered dispensary there to call that the area. But the liberal interpretation is you have a zoning district that allows the medical marijuana use, and this zoning district area that you previously defined is where you have to allow recreational dispensaries. But waving my hand more, in that district you can't limit the number without going to a referendum to limit the number. And then to your final point, which is yes, then you need to go to a referendum to say we don't want to do on-site consumption somewhere. It's like a four level sort of 4 steps to get through that process. Sure.
I'm on the Princeton Planning Board,
And the takeaway that I'm getting from this is unless the town votes to prohibit consumption, any current restaurant in town that has a pouring license is probably going to be entitled to offer marijuana edibles. And any store in town that currently has a liquor license is probably going to be able to sell marijuana. And I guess I'm putting that as a question. Am I reading this correctly?
Could you say the beginning part again? I'm sorry, because I missed how you started that. Sorry, because I think it's important. That's a great question. It's important. I didn't hear the beginning.
Unless the town votes to prohibit consumption, I suppose it also would have to vote to prohibit sale. It seems to me that if the town currently has restaurants with pouring licenses, the restaurants are going to be able to offer marijuana edibles, and the liquor stores in town are going to be able to sell marijuana.
Well, I think we have to clarify whether. No, I'm not going to be able to read it. I think I have a grasp on your question, but I was struggling with trying to have a response for a second. So you have to keep the two actions separate. So there's sale, which has one referendum process attached to it, and then you have consumption, which has a separate referendum process. And so taking the consumption part, if you wanted to tackle that, so let's say your town wanted to try it and say, yeah, we'll allow some on-site consumption. One of the big parts of this is goes to the voters and say we want to allow on-site consumption. But I think MMLA said, but all the text and all the regulations accompanying that are not going to the voters. It's more just, would you allow on-site consumption at some level? Let's say everyone says yes, the majority says yes. Then you have to go through and imagine a year-long process to then refine how many you would allow, under what conditions, and who would regulate it. So that's where I think MMLA, the Lawyers Association, was raising a lot of questions about how the referendum question gets put on the ballot and what it actually says. I know I dodged part of your question, but just the so sale and consumption process as it relates to alcohol licenses. I think it's a good question. We're going to go to this woman here and then the gentleman in the back. You go. Sorry, yeah.
I'm from Millbury, town of Millbury. My question would be on property owners. What kind of control can they have, or do they have, when it comes to their tenants and any type of control?
Yeah, so that's definitely covered here. I wouldn't call it cut and dry, but it does seem to suggest that, so if you think about a rental residential property, start with that the property owner would need to put some specific language in their lease. And there's a whole variety of different ways that can happen, and some of the commentary was, you know, if you had like affordable housing or Section 8 housing, then that would much more easily fall under the federal law and basically say that they have a little bit more control. So if you're just if you have a rental property that's a residential unit, then it's putting some language in the lease. And then if you've ever dealt with that, how hard it can be to enforce leases and what happens under a lease. But there is an opportunity for a landlord to do that, then putting the person on notice. And it does say stuff in here about consuming marijuana or smoking it. So smoking may be prohibited, but it seems to suggest that lease could not prohibit someone from having an edible. And I think I read that it's based on like smoke could be noxious to other people, whereas an edible, you're just gonna kind of do that yourself. Commercial property owners in here says that they can also sort of regulate, obviously, the consumption by an employee. You know, I think that's kind of easy. You can do that. And then it says that a commercial property landlord can then restrict the sale production, advertising, and some of the, so I said sale, production, advertising. So basically, if you're a commercial landlord, it seems to suggest that in your lease, you could say, we don't want this use in our building. That's the general read of the initial, that's the initial read of it. I'm not a lawyer, so check on that, but that's how it seems to get worded. Sorry, in the back.
Jeff, you brought this up on question 16 on zoning and retail use versus R&D use. And just, I think it's real important to go back to that because the zoning enforcement officer is going to take on an application and try to decide, does this fit the R&D bylaw we have, or do we classify this under a standard retail, where the R&D bylaws singled out into one particular zone where retail can be allowed nearly throughout town. So the question becomes is what does the state, do they have recommendation for zoning enforcement officers to interpret if this is classified as standard retail, or would it fall under an R&D bylaw or some revision of that?
Right, and that's a finer point on what you were raising earlier. It seems to me it's worth reiterating that we, and I kind of just got a word from Janet here, that we're interested in taking a lead as much as possible. It's going to take some resources that, to figure that out, but and I think a legal component is going to be important to our ability to help towns. But at this particular point, we want to take the lead, but I wouldn't want it to get lost that you then as a town representative at some level don't need to do anything. Just, we want to help and we can help because we have a little bit broader overview and a little bit more reach with other RPAs and things like that, but now's the time to somehow get with some elected official and say we need to write a letter to the legislature now and just get some concerns to them. So it's an interim step that you might take while a broader thing. I mean, this happened today, and so we had since November 8th to start dealing with it. So this session was intended to serve this exact purpose, but it's going to take a little bit of time to sort it out, and that's the one message that the legislature needs to know is that time is ticking right now, and whether it should keep doing that is an important thing that they know.
Sorry, just to follow up, if you don't mind, on just in the question, it's really just standard use.
Mike, sorry.
I talk pretty loud, I'm sorry.
Just versus the standard retail or a town that already has an R&D bylaw. Would the zoning enforcement officer say, this R&D bylaw has the word marijuana in it, okay? Can I make them go through the standard process of R&D, assuming we didn't make any changes at the time, or do I have to call this retail? So that it's really based, the question is more along the lines for towns that have an R&D bylaw but haven't amended it to support recreation.
I'll jump out there with a hazard, which is a hazardous guess, which is if you look at the definitions under most of those bylaws, they always, and that was the direction given, was go back to the Department of Health medical marijuana regulations and grab it, tie it to that. And so you might not be able to do that once a building commissioner really digs in there and says, well, you know what? We're not dealing with medical marijuana products. We're dealing with something that's still as yet undefined. And so that, this is a good point for me to just observe that this is so complex. It involves so many different elements. So you have the zoning enforcement officer, you have the zoning bylaw, you have the planning board, you have the select board with the referendum. Then it achieves a whole other level of complexity where you have the referendum process is set up by the Secretary of State. And you have the bylaw amendment process, which is set up by the Attorney General. And then you have the legislature who sets the laws. And then you have all these components. So this is a sweeping change, which is what I had, I think, in my slide somewhere. But
RMD, I couldn't understand the initials.
RMD is the correct one, so it's a registered medical dispensary.
Thanks.
Janet said earlier, did you say in the paper you saw today that the governor said if you have marijuana at home, it has to be kept in a locked place?
It's.
I don't think the governor said that.
No, but the interpretation of the law.
Yep. There's a. Okay, go ahead.
It was the interpretation of the referendum question. Through the governor, he released it to the Mass Chiefs of Police, I believe it is.
Yep.
It was through the Mass Live. I can send you the link on it, Katie. I just read it last night. Jeff had sent it to me, and I believe it's probably the same
item that was sent, that was in the Boston Globe this morning?
Yes. I don't know if you, it sounds like you have another sort of aspect to that question, but
Well, I do, it's just that in all my listening today and past research on the law, I've never seen anything that says a homeowner's gonna have to register that he's growing plants.
it's
So,
not in there.
how are they going to enforce keeping it in a locked place without invasion of home privacy? And who is that gonna fall on? The police, a zoning enforcement officer? Are they gonna have warrants to go in and check? I mean, that begs another whole area of difficulty.
I would associate it with the gun laws. You're supposed to keep them locked type of thing. People don't come around looking to make sure that they're safely secured.
So it's like a gun law.
I would, just off the top of my head, that's the association that I would make with that.
And I would encourage you, we'll post this on our website, but it literally came out yesterday, and so it's and I said this already, but it's the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. So this is basically the top official at the state who deals with public safety and law enforcement, wrote the 8-page memo. And I think the important connection is that the Act, question 4, had a lot of stuff in there about personal consumption and how growth is regulated. And so what this memo does is it seems to package it all up into one document, and I think it's a guidance for law enforcement officers to use this. And just to the question about enforcement, is at this point it would be a division of the law enforcement, local law enforcement, who would deal with this, because it's not zoning, so there's no zoning enforcement officer who would get brought into it. But this is the part that we didn't really focus on too much because it was happening so fast, and the law enforcement definitely have a lot on their hands. But I think that this memo, the 8-page memo, was thorough, and I think it was intended to help. I think people realize that this is the part that's happening as of today, whereas we're trying to capture the part of the next couple of months.
Well, the other part of that though is like with guns being locked up, you have to have a gun permit though. So you're registered.
That was, yeah, point
Right.
is well taken.
So, but with this you don't.
Free for all. Hi, my name's Diane from the town of Upton. I work for the Board of Health Office, and it's my understanding that the tobacco regulations, that these regulations are gonna pretty much go right into effect with the tobacco regulations. If you have regulations for tobacco, these will also apply, it's gonna be the same scenario. So I agree with you that we're probably gonna be part of the permitting process for people that, you know, if they're looking to sell tobacco, marijuana products, that they have to come to the Board of Health for a permit. My second question, and I haven't heard anybody bring this up, have they found a way for the police department to regulate this? And, you know, they're gonna be pulling somebody over that's driving erratically. How do you prove that this person's been smoking marijuana and they've smoked too much? Chief?
Right, I think the response was from, you can't, and I think that, I'm just trying to look through the memo and see if it actually does that. There is an operating under the influence. The little that I have gleaned is that it'll come down to the roadside sobriety sort of situation, and then it'll have to be, that's where the tests start to happen, is how that happens. It's a great issue, and I'm sure, I mean, law enforcement have been, I'm sure, worried about this for quite some time. So it's not that I'm gonna dodge that, but I think it's yet to be seen. The Board of Health comment they made, I think, is really great. The only thing I would say is, now is the time to articulate something to the state legislature to make sure that you have that authority, because I think that there's some language in here that has caused people concern with the unreasonably impractical aspect, and I can only imagine that they wouldn't want this to automatically go and be regulated like tobaccos. So I don't know if that language does that, but I think making the legislature clear that you think it should be, and please make sure that it can be, you know, regulated by the Board of Health, because I think that they need to know that as they dive into this. Right? So just a quick show of hands, how many more people have questions? This is great, by the way, so we still have some time. All right, there's a couple, so just make sure you raise your hand for a mic. speak right into the mic.
Thank you. From Auburn, and I just wanted to thank you for the question and answer period. I think it's probably most beneficial for all of us. Also, to build upon the Board of Health, I think we all kind of realize just from the discussion that it involves so many departments. For the Board of Health, I think there's questions that we would like to understand as far as permitting, not just through the tobacco concerns, but also I think commercial facilities, retail facilities are going to make a lot of money on the edibles, and so having the understanding of what we would be permitting through the Board of Health, we typically permit retail food establishments, having an understanding of how to permit them and the products, because various products have, different levels of THC, as the nurse had referenced before. So just trying to get some clarification and guidance from the state on that would be helpful.
Right, thanks.
Fairhaven again, we've been talking questions back here. I have a overlay district, medical marijuana bylaw. We've actually permitted a RMD. It's under construction right now, and hopefully they're going to be opening up in March. My feeling is, and our town passed it by 55%. So, my direction, I believe, is going to be looking at how I, deal with a moratorium to deal with writing a bylaw or modify my existing bylaw to deal with recreational sales. The questions come up, talks about the referendum. Referendum is 10% of the voters. However, the selectmen could place on our April general town election a question that says no consumption. Or does that have to wait until the biennial on 18?
Yeah, that's a great, I think it's worth clarifying, because I think the way that it reads is that the Board of Selectmen, on their own initiative, could put a referendum question together for prohibition, 20% alcohol sales or less than an RMD. That gives the Board of Selectmen, it appears to give the Board of Selectmen that authority to put that question on. The other question is on-site consumption. And the way it's read, the way it appears to read, is that Board of Selectmen don't have control over that. That's 10% of the voters go to get signatures and they drop it off to the town clerk, and therefore Board of Selectmen shall put it on. And the only silver lining I could read out of that was it's tied to the biennial election after the one we just had. So that extends out that timeline. So does that clarify what?
So the selectmen could not put in for the April town meeting or for the April election a prohibition against on-site consumption only.
Right. I think that you cannot. I don't think that according to the way you read that as a whole is that the Board of Selectmen cannot put that question on for on-site consumption. I don't know. Maybe it's an option. Maybe there's some interpretation, but it seems to say that 10% of the voters do that at the biennial election. But then the Board of Selectmen can talk about prohibition or limiting the numbers. That's the initial take on it. It all needs to be tested, but I think that appears to be the way it reads.
Town of Westwood, thank you very much for opening this up to communities outside of your area. Very much appreciated and very helpful. So Westwood is a town where we have a majority vote against the referendum, and we have a bylaw in place that I believe was a unanimous decision of town meeting to not only regulate medical marijuana, we put in the definition for RMD, and then put another definition for other marijuana uses, which was everything other than an RMD. And they were specifically prohibited throughout the town. So I think we'll need to go back and take a look at that, because that prohibited cultivation everywhere. So we'll have to go back and address that to allow home cultivation and be consistent with this, with the new law. I expect that the town will go to our equal vote and request a prohibition, and I expect it will likely be approved by the voters. But in the event that it's not, we may want to put in some language restricting, instead of prohibiting, all facilities that are not R&Ds, restricting it to no more than 20% of the off-site consumption licenses. My question here is, Westwood was a dry town until recently and only has 4 off-site consumption facilities, so 20% is less than 1. Would your interpretation be that we would be required to have 1?
Round
Round up. So we, 0.8 would
comes
be
out
round up.
0.8, I rounded up to that.
My second question has to do with the referendum in the November 18 election for on-site consumption. Is it your understanding that petitioners could continually come back at every biannual election with a question if it fails in November 18? Could we expect to see it again in November 20, in November 22? Or is there a point at which we would no longer have to consider this?
Yeah, those are great questions. And for whatever, I also just make this point, for whatever we're not articulating in here, we'll probably re-go through this and really hone in on these questions and make sure that they're clear. This was just to show that we're really interested in trying to figure this out with you guys. You asked a lot of great questions, and I think that at this point, we want to continue a process of discussion, the dialogue part, but I would hinge on other experts who have been chiming in. So the Municipal Lawyers Association, wrote to the governor and the state legislature president specific questions about the referendum. So we're hoping that by that professional organization of lawyers citing really big questions about how this works, that is part of what they hear, and then reiterate, kind of backing it up with, a letter from the town of Westwood with questions about how does this work, and we expect to see these referendum questions every other year. So I think it will take some effort on town's part to have your voices heard now, because that now seems to be the critical point. The bylaw you mentioned, which prohibits recreational uses everywhere, it's a little flag that pops up, is that it may be in conflict with this, and if it could be challenged and say that you may need to amend that somewhat. This gentleman asked if the on-site consumption, if it's approved.
Which is the default?
Yeah, which is the default.
I think that unless they do something, it's allowed. I think it's not allowed unless they do something.
Right. So there's and MMLA raised that as a question. Like, if a town doesn't do the referendum on on-site consumption, does that mean something? Does that mean that it's allowed? If we didn't opt out? And I don't know. That seems like a total extreme, but that question's in, so that's a good thing that the question's in. Diana?
I just wanted to quickly thank Jeff and the CMRPC for doing this. I think it serves a lot of critical issues. My name is Eric Beal. I work at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and I am a recovering attorney. I still practice extremely part-time in that area. And just as sort of looking at this in a matter of perspective, one of the reasons I feel like my head is exploding is that we have this regulated product. And when you compare it to tobacco and alcohol, we have decades, right, decades of regulatory experience and litigated case law governing those products, and also legislative tweaks, right, over that time. And so now we have a law that sort of was approved by the voters, but sidestepped all the routes, the regular routes of legislation, the committees, the compromise, the lobbying. For various groups. And so, this is a great start, and it is going to have to be sorted out over time. And just second what Jeff said in terms of, raising our concerns with our legislators, because I think there is going to be a state fix. Thank you.
Just quick, another show of hands, how many more people may have questions? So it's good, we're getting down there. I do have a quick concluding remark, so after that, we're close to 12, this has been great, so we can keep going too if you want. We're here all day. Parking is validated, so.
Tip your weight.
We don't have lunch though.
Steve?
Yes.
Okay, I'm on planning board in Weston, and I'm kind of looking for ultimate guidance here, when I'm gonna take back to the board and the board of selectmen. So, our town has no liquor license, we have no liquor stores, we have no restaurants that actually serve liquor. And I'm not sure how we voted on the marijuana acceptance law, but I'm kind of thinking that we voted it down. And, I just wanna know what we need to do now. So I'm thinking, the first recommendation is we're supposed to, come up with a little range of letters to send to the, legislature. Okay, and the second is, maybe somehow, and I don't know how I'm doing this, but we do this, we press the AG's office for some language on how to come up with an appropriate, moratorium. Because the timing is all off for everybody. And doing that, then we need to consult with our town council, correct, for writing this moratorium letter after we get this guidance out of the AG's office. And then finally, we have to do a referendum in the town if we decide we don't want to, that we want to basically opt out of having our MDs and all the other things. And if we don't do that, then this law moves forward just sort of universally. We have to opt out. Right?
I don't think I can stand up here and give you a definitive, but those steps sound legitimate. I had previously been sort of in different places with this. We wanted to host this to start the discussion, and we were hoping that, every town didn't have to go back and do something individual and go to their town council. And if you can imagine the amount of money that for 351 towns to go and talk to their town council separately is kind of a drain on resources. Not only that, in your time and effort on a board or committee, but there are so many questions here that we want to continue the discussion, and we can fill in gaps in information and we can take a lead, but there will be some due diligence that I think every town will have to do to some extent. So yeah, reaching out to your town council, I think, makes some sense. I wasn't there a week ago with that recommendation, but having poured over this, hearing your questions and concerns, and really the timeline is one of the biggest impediments to allowing a town to actually kind of artfully go through this process, because we all know that the simple act of writing a bylaw takes time and has a bunch of steps in it, and so that's just the most basic concern with time. And Chris wants to say something. So yeah, I think that the general outline, I can't say whether you want to do a referendum or not, but the basic premise that you laid out, I think makes sense, especially bringing it to the legislator, because that's what needs to happen now, and then you take steps with your own individual town.
I just want to say that I think a little bit of patience is probably warranted. I think in many cases there's going to be different models of moratoria language. I think there's going to be different models of local bylaws that do various things, maybe things in combination, but certainly there's going to be a huge number of these, and I know that certainly we are looking to help communities with that kind of thing, to develop those models. So I think just a little patience is in order.
One quick statement for the town of Concord. We have no patience. My warrant closes January 4th for our spring town meeting. So we know Ashland passed a moratorium. It's under consideration with the AG. I've put a draft together. Our town council will hopefully review it before the warrant closes, but we're plowing ahead. I have no choice.
When is your Springtown meeting?
April.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah,
Yep,
we give people a lot of time.
Yeah, I think, patience will be key, but if, I guess, not to overemphasize it, but the moratorium only does a certain amount of prevention for a community. So the referendums, that's worth testing. I hate to stand up here and act like I'm an attorney, I'm not, but a referendum just has a whole different bucket of regulations and process, and it's regulated by the Secretary of State. So the zoning moratorium is typically applied in zoning. So, that's where the Attorney General's office comes into play again in offering guidance. And it's a question, like, can a moratorium be general enough to apply to that part of a referendum? So the attorney, I meant to say this, so we have had some contact with the Attorney General's office. The municipal law unit is here in Worcester. So they're the ones who review zoning bylaws after they're approved by town meeting. They're having some informational sessions in early January, and I am a little remiss that I didn't have it up. So I think that there's some across the state. There's one out in Eastern Mass, and then there's one, gosh, I'm forgetting where it is. I can get that information to you, but what I'm seeing now is all these opportunities for some questions to get raised directly to the Attorney General's office. So they're hosting, I think what they did is they proposed a informational session for planning boards and towns officials to remind themselves how to do bylaw amendments. So it's great. And I didn't know if it was attached or connected to this, but now it seems like it would be an opportunity for certain communities or people to go to that and you know, use that sort of platform to raise these questions about you know, moratorium do's and don'ts, and then maybe we can try to help see if the Attorney General's office can issue some kind of guidance. I mean, I think that it might be in their best interest too, because if everyone's going to do this, it's going to be a lot of work, and if everyone's going to do it slightly differently, then that's going to be a huge you know, drain on their resources. So there's some value to looking at that. Yeah, I think we'll take two more, and then we'll do a quick concluding remark.
Okay. The more you talk about it, the more question comes up. If the Board of Selectmen puts an opt-out vote on, in our case, the March town elections, does that opt-out vote, which I expect would succeed, opt the town out from home growth?
No, because I think it's attached to the retail.
It's only attached to the retail sales.
Right, the language in there, yes, it's the retail sales. Is the selectmen have control of the retail sales. Voters, the 10% of the voters have kind of control over on-site consumption.
And no one has control over home growth. No one has. Which I did some calculations last night in Colorado. It's 10 milligrams of THC is a serving of THC, and I did all the math on what's in the home grows. That's 72,576 10 milligram servings of THC allowed in a home under our home grow provision.
Yeah. You know, and that's going to go to the legislature to see if they want to tinker with that part of it. I mean, that was like the will of the voters was clear that was something that people were paying attention to. This part, maybe not so much. So, I don't know how to get back to the slideshow. I think my concluding remarks are very simple.
Can you save this?
A little bit more. Oh, okay. Actually, one before that, sorry. I won't read all these, but I want to thank Connor Robichaud in our office. He's been a great help to us in organizing this. Again, as Jan said, this was the biggest event that we had put on in a while, so a lot of logistics I owe credit to Connor for. So we wanted to give a basic understanding and identify areas of concern. We want to give you a message to bring back to the communities, and one of that is that there are a ton of questions, and that there's a ton of communities worried about this. So just to remind your other people in your community, your elected officials, that this is happening everywhere. So it's not just your town, which that's the way I know. I worked in town government before, so it feels like that. But if you looked at this, you know, group, there's a really broad representation. One of the key actions is for communities to let their representatives know that you have concerns about, and these are just examples, but timeline and how it impacts a municipality's ability to understand the new act and implement it, the number of ambiguities and questions being raised, and the need for the legislature to consider it carefully and let them decide if they want to, you know, take on amendments. Other unique issues that may face your community in attempting to understand and implement the new act. We want to begin, so we're gathering questions and concerns, and we hope to articulate it in a manner that's vague but, you know, specific in terms of the types of concerns. A large number of communities came and sent that to the legislature. This is a starting point to a statewide conversation. You know, under Janet Pierce's lead, we want to help and we want to coordinate with other RPAs, and I think the idea of a RPA level working group makes sense, but we want to understand what else is happening out there, so we don't want to duplicate efforts, we want to join efforts, however we can do that. So that's model bylaws. The moratorium stuff is really just the super time sensitive part of it, but then towns are going to have to craft other bylaws too. Regional working group. So we have a lot of the resources that we talked about are on our website right now. I'll add, Connor will help me add the memo from the public safety official, because that came out yesterday. I think that's important. And then we have a survey on the SurveyMonkey platform, and what we were hoping to do is send a thank you email via the registration and give you a link to that survey. It's probably like 10 questions. We wanted to try to gather some more scientific data on who has marijuana bylaws and who doesn't. There's that question. And then there's an open box for other questions. And so we want to try to offer this for a limited period, like so say December 30th, so that if you weren't here, or if you know other people who couldn't attend, or your other Board of Selectmen members have questions that you want to use that, we're going to compile that and carry that forward. So we'll have another session at some level at some point. I think the goal would be to work harder to join forces with the other RPAs, so then we can use that as the overarching framework, and then have more direct input to other communities in each area. So I want to thank you for participating. This has been great. Thank you.